A seguir, vamos seguir, portanto, passa a repetição, o curso normal dos nossos trabalhos e irei convidar o moderador da próxima sessão, cujo tema é Approaching Financial Inclusions, Last Frontier, Saving the Rural Poor. E o moderador é Greta Bull, CEO da GPF. Por favor.
Can you hear me? Hello? Oh, yeah, that works. Okay. Well, that's going to be a very hard act to follow. But I thought we might have trouble keeping the audience awake after lunch. I don't think we're going to have to worry about that too much. So if my panelists could please take a seat, I will briefly introduce them. So at the far end, we have Dr. Daniel Szydlowski, who is the superintendent of banks, insurance, and funds in Peru, and has been since 2011. He's also the chair of AFI's steering committee. And is currently involved in overseeing Peru's very interesting and successful experiment in non-banking correspondence, and we'll be hearing from him about that experience. To his right, we have Esselina Macombe, Professor Esselina Macombe, who was formerly a member of the board of the Bank of Mozambique and is now a professor at Eduardo Mondlane University in Maputo, and she'll be talking about the experience here in Mozambique with digital financial services. And then we move to our private sector panelists. So we have Mark Adams, who is an analyst in the Microfinance Partnerships Unit at the One Acre Fund. The One Acre Fund is providing bundled agricultural and financial services for 200,000 farmers in Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. And will soon be requiring payment from some of those farmers using digital means after having experimented with it for some time. So we'll be hearing from him about digital payments in that context. And then finally, we have Mark Flaming, who is the Chief Business Development Officer with the Microcred Group. He's based in Madagascar and is responsible for rolling out a very large agent banking network implementation, first in Senegal and Madagascar, soon to be followed by Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, and some other network banks. So as it was mentioned, I am the new CEO of CGAP, and as many of you know, who know CGAP loves to use the consensor tool. So as part of my training at CGAP, I have to run a session with one of these. So if all of you could pick up the little button thing, we're going to start with a few questions just to set the stage. And to keep this interactive and engaged, we'd like to engage with the audience a little bit. So we'll look for hands after some of these questions, and please feel free to engage and discuss. So our subject is on the last mile, the rural frontier and reaching the rural poor. And for those of you who work in Africa, you'll know that it gets rural pretty fast in Africa. And I think some of the experiences we have around the table will tell us a little bit about the challenges of that from both the private sector and the regulatory perspective. So just to set the stage, what percentage of the population in Mozambique is considered rural? Please look at the options and give us your answer at the end. I'll tell you when you can click. 52%, 58%, 62%, 68%, 172%. So if you could please use your clickers now when voting is open now. If you could please use your clickers to pick one of these options. Click one more. Okay, so the voting is open. Choose one option, and when we get to, I don't know, a big number, we'll stop and take stock. Ooh, good voting. Okay, we're at 100 and, oh, wow. Almost 200. Can we do 200? One more. Okay, great. So I'm going to stop the voting now. 57% of you said 68%, and that is absolutely correct. in Africa, the proportion of the population that's rural is very high, and Mozambique is not alone in that regard. In Malawi, the rural population is almost 85% of the total. Zambia, 61% of the total. And on average in Africa, about 70% of the population is rural and depends on agriculture for their income. And so it is a clear challenge in Africa as well as in other parts of the world. Next question. The biggest obstacle to financial inclusion for rural populations is A, not understanding client demand or behavior. B, 2, restrictive agent e-money regulation. 3, lack of basic infrastructure, roads, phone towers, and the like. 4, too expensive. 5, operators are still trying to figure out how to serve urban populations. Thanks very much. And 6, other. So I'm going to open the voting, and let's hear what people think about this one. Let's see if we can get to 200 again. Come on, get the votes in. Okay. The voting is in. Main answer, lack of basic infrastructure, roads, phone towers, etc. By a long shot. Not understanding client demand behavior, still trying to figure out how to serve urban populations. So pretty strong consistency around lack of basic infrastructure, particularly in rural areas. Okay. Next question. Too much emphasis is placed on the potential of digital finance to reach rural populations. First, strongly agree. This is an easy one. Strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. What's digital finance? So we'll open up the voting. Okay. Strongly agree, not surprising. We have a bit of a selection bias, I think, in this particular room, but that very strong agreement that digital finance has a lot of potential to reach rural populations. So because we started a bit late, and I have a very strong interest in keeping this session to its allotted time because I have a 5:30 flight, I'm going to skip the discussion here and move on to my panelists. And we're going to manage this so that the panelists each have about 10 minutes to talk about their specific area of interest. And I will manage that by increasingly frantic hand movements, indicating the time. And then we'll open it up to general questions. We've got a lot of experience around the table. We've got experience from regulators. We've got experience from industry, from Peru over to Mozambique, via Madagascar and Senegal. So I think a lot of rich opportunity to learn and discuss. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark Flaming to talk about the experience of microcredit.
Hello. Microcred is a network of microfinance banks that recently took a strategic decision to transform the different banks in our network into mass market financial institutions capable of reaching millions of customers. We operate in 8 countries, many of them West Africa, Madagascar, and China. The basis of this strategy is really built on a new approach to a distribution network, and we launched this new banking correspondent network in Madagascar and Senegal. In these 2 countries, our subsidiaries were mature. Each one of them had 30 branches, and we had really reached the frontier of viability of our branch network. As Greta said, things get rural pretty fast in Madagascar. I think the rural population is 85%. But to put that in perspective, I live in the capital. I live in the center of the capital, and I have a rice paddy around my house. So things get rural very fast in Madagascar. So what we were able to do is to create essentially an acquiring network of merchants where our customers can go out and they can do a cash deposit or a cash withdrawal at a merchant. And I'll share a few numbers here that I think are really, they begin to put a face on the possibilities that we've all been hoping for in financial inclusion. When we sign up customers, any customer who ever once puts their money into these bank accounts, we have a 75% active rate. In any one given month, 55% of our active customers are active, and they do an average of 4 transactions a month. Now, for those of you who don't know, that level of activity and that level of customer transaction is much greater than the M-Pesas of the world. They're staggering numbers, in fact. And it's not because we are clever. In fact, we're still at a very primitive initial stage. What this shows is that what we are offering people is a simple bank account where they can save their money and they have opportunities for credit. And what you see in this kind of activity rate, this kind of this uptake, this adoption rate, is the latent demand out there in the population for people to have access to a bank account and banking services, which is a very different thing than using a payment service provider to transfer money. So for us in these countries, this has meant the ability to spread rapidly outside our branch network and into the rural areas. Now, there are 2 things that are critical to our ability to do this. One is that we have to put these cash merchant service points in people's neighborhoods, okay? It must be convenient for people. These are people who are making a decision to adopt a bank account as an instrument for their daily financial lives. This is not a one-time decision to pay a bill or to transfer money. This is a decision to actually keep your money in a bank, and that means you must be able to get that money back out quickly. The second thing is it needs to be free. And so our customers put money in, they take money out, and they transfer money, and it's free for them. Now, we can make money giving all these services away for free because we're magic. But there's 2 things there are a couple of regulatory requirements to do this, and I thought it would be helpful for the current crowd to compare the 2 different approaches that were taken in Senegal and Madagascar, because I think it highlights the impact of regulation on what we can do. And before I say this, let me say that both of the regulators in those are excellent partners. They are both completely committed to financial inclusion, very committed to the idea of what we're doing. So what I'm going to tell you really represents the best efforts of 2 very committed regulators. So in Senegal, the regulator rightly understood that what we were asking for was just simply the ability to set up an acquiring network. Our core banking system, our middleware, our switching platform, the ISO protocols that we use is exactly the same as a card network. And so the regulator recognized this as an acquiring network, and in fact there was no special license, the regulator uses the same oversight mechanisms that they use to monitor all card operations of banks. And what this allowed us to do in Senegal was that Senegal has this very robust payment service industry, and there are a lot of agents, payment service agents out in the market, and we were able to go to these agents and really piggyback on this emerging infrastructure. And for many reasons, it turned out to be very interesting for these agents to become our cash merchants because it had almost no cost for them, and they saw the value proposition that we were offering was complementary to the payment service providers that they were also serving as agents for. And so this has allowed us in Senegal to move very quickly, almost effortlessly, because there's so little marginal cost for this vast payment service network. In Madagascar, the regulator took a different approach, and the regulator has identified these cash merchants as a form of bank agent, and the regulator actually licensed each one of the agents. And what that means in practical terms is that for us to find the agent has to qualify with the eligibility requirements of the banking supervisor, one of which is that they may not be the agent of a payment service provider. So in reality, what is happening in Madagascar compared to Senegal is that in Madagascar, the farther we go out into the rural area, we simply cannot find the people, the merchant, who is able to comply with the various documents and the eligibility requirements by the banking superintendent. And it's simply, it creates a different landscape for us. We are, in Madagascar, our banking correspondents are still very much in urban areas, and right now we are in discussions with the mobile operators who have extensive networks, because we are seeing that then as a possibility, the possible network of cash points. The challenge that we run into there is that customers have to pay to put cash in or to take cash out of mobile money platforms. So, you know, what's interesting again is that the regulations, and in this case, certain regulations that set eligibility requirements for who can be a cash merchant, they just simply change the economics of it for us, and it just makes us less sure about how far we can go in Madagascar, say, compared to Senegal. I would say there's one other point that, I mean, this particular point, we actually have a very good relationship with the banking superintendent, and we share a lot of information with the banking superintendent, and there's no doubt in my mind that this relationship is going to evolve, and we're all going to work this out. So I'm not sharing this, I'm sharing this all in a collaborative way. There's a bigger problem, though, and that has to do with the regulation of the mobile industry. Because in these two countries, the mobile operators are not required to offer basic communication services of USSD gateways and SMS gateways. And basically what that means is that the same channel that Safaricom uses, for example, the USSD shortcode, cannot be used in these countries. And I think that this is really critical. This is probably the biggest single point. Right now, we can deliver this service where we have a data channel. And you all know that that data channel coverage only goes so far. There's no doubt in my mind that we will have a long and fruitful relationship with the regulators in our country, because they're all committed to financial inclusion. I am much less certain about the mobile operators who have their own reasons for denying banks access to USSD and SMS channels. And that, more than anything, is going to be the roadblock to reaching into the rural areas. We have the value proposition. The customers have embraced this. We have the business model to give these services away for free to the customer. The next phase is really going to be a communication and network issue.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think that raises a lot of interesting food for thought, and we'll take some questions on this at the end, but I think now we're going to move on to our next private sector panelist, Mark Adams from One Acre Fund.
Thank you. As Greta mentioned, I'm coming from One Acre Fund. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with our work, so I'll do a little bit of an introduction, and then I'll cover some areas around how we're using technology to deliver to the last mile of clients, and also how regulators in different sectors can come together to collaborate to help encourage this sort of rural lending. So first, One Acre Fund is an agricultural organization that's serving 200,000 smallholder farmers across East Africa. Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi are our core programs of country operation programs. And when One Acre Fund was founded, we recognized that there was a need for credit for smallholder farmers, but credit was just one component of the serious challenges that smallholder farmers face all along the process of their business. So through communication with farmers and listening to their needs, we developed a comprehensive solution for all of those challenges in one comprehensive service bundle that really works with them from seed to selling of the crop to help them meet those needs. So what that bundle looks like, it's high quality inputs, farming inputs delivered on credit to the farmers. As I said, delivery is a key component of that model. We deliver them to a convenient location for our farmers at the time that they need them in the season. We also give our farmers intensive agricultural trainings in modern planting techniques, use of the fertilizer and those seeds. And then we work with our farmers post-harvest as well to ensure that they have the connections to market and storage capability to really maximize their profit. So we've grown rapidly. That model is working well for us across East Africa, but we also recognize that although we know that the service bundle itself is key to really the impact and the change on farmer productivity, we recognize that there are other ways to deliver that bundle as well, and other ways to build in services for smallholder farmers. That's why part of our work, and the team that I represent, is engaging with MFIs and other financial service providers to help them develop parts of this bundle in their own models and their own programs to serve their own farming clients. And we really think this is crucial for the future of increasing the quality and quantity of services to smallholder farmers. So that's a little bit on our model and the external work that we're doing as well. And one of the topics that is also really exciting for us right now in Kenya is M-Pesa, as Greta already mentioned at the beginning. We have worked for a few seasons with M-Pesa, trialing it with our farmers in Kenya. And though we had to adapt a few times and overcome some challenges, this coming season in 2016, which we're enrolling for now, we plan to roll out M-Pesa repayment to all of our farmers in the Kenya program, which is going to be over 150,000 farmers, which will be using M-Pesa to repay their loans. So it's really exciting for us. It's really exciting for the team that's worked on the M-Pesa trial as well. And we really see this impacting our program in some key areas. Obviously, sustainability is one. We're lowering the time that field officers need to spend with farmers. We're increasing the potential caseload for our field officers. We also see improvements in quality of service for our farmers as well, with our field officers being able to spend more time on trainings as opposed to helping collect money and that sort of thing. And then also it's going to really help us cut down on any instances of fraud and really increase client satisfaction and trust in the organization. I mentioned some challenges. I know that one of the challenges we faced early on was at the certain level, when you're working with M-Pesa, with Safaricom, the fees are quite high relative to the transaction sizes. And this is a challenge that other organizations are likely to face as well. We solved this challenge by, One Acre Fund is taking on all of the fees. The farmers pay no fees. One Acre Fund pays the fees to M-Pesa, but in order for it to be sustainable for us, we also needed to leverage our partnerships to help create an agreement with M-Pesa and Safaricom that's much more sustainable in the long run. So the last thing I'd like to touch on is opportunities for regulators like yourselves, the people sitting in this room, to really come together and collaborate to both improve services for smallholder farmers and also incentivize financial service providers to engage with this community, this market, because the way it stands, there's a massive financing gap for smallholder farmers. Something like 3% of their financing demands are being met currently, although they represent 70%, as you mentioned, of the world's poor. So what we want to happen is to get MFIs engaged and lower the barriers of entry to the farm finance sector. One example of where regulators can collaborate, I think Rwanda is a great example. We work in Rwanda, and one of the programs that Rwanda is deploying right now is increasing the supply of inputs, particularly fertilizer, in the country. And that's great. That's going to help smallholder farmers increase their yields. And as the agricultural regulators are approving more distributors, financial regulators can also be coming in to help complement the increased supply by working with those distributors to ensure that they're offering appropriate credit terms to the agro-dealers that are buying from the distributors. Another way that they could potentially work together is as the agricultural regulators identify those agro-dealers, financial regulators can also work with them to ensure their creditworthiness for the distributors who are making those loans. And we do think that credit is an important element of getting the supply percolating throughout the country, spreading into the rural areas. Credit is going to be a key feature of that, but it has to be done in a responsible way. And one example may be to create or really target agro-dealers within the existing Credit Reference Bureau to make sure that distributors can check before they're making loans to agro-dealers. And the overall outcome of that is going to be, like I said, helping farmers increase their productivity. But we also recognize that with access to improved inputs, you're looking at much lower risk for the loans you're making to those smallholder farmers. So if the regulators in Rwanda, and this is really an example that can be applied in cases of many other countries, if they can work together to ensure the supply of inputs is strong, is consistent, and is reaching the smallholder farmers, that's really going to incentivize financial service providers to come in and start making loans to those smallholder farmers. The loans themselves will be much less risky.
Thanks very much, Marco. That's working now. Also, a lot of good food for thought, so thank you. And I thank both of you for staying within the 8 minutes that we'd agreed previously. So we're now going to turn from the private sector to our regulators, who are sitting way down at the end, starting with Esselina Makombe from Mozambique to tell us a little bit about what the experience has been here in Mozambique and what some of the challenges are.
We just saw the poem, but I'm going to speak it. Okay. I'm going to speak in Portuguese. I'm asking you to use the microphone because I'm going to speak in Portuguese. Acabamos de ver há pouco jogral que claramente diz o povo quer banco. E, na realidade, o facto de dizer que o povo quer banco não é somente o banco por si, o banco aqui representa todo tipo de serviços financeiros que a população precisa. E como também vimos no início, a maioria da população moçambicana está na zona rural. Nós, na nossa exposição lá fora, colocamos a situação de inclusão financeira em que o país se encontra e claramente vê-se que a zona rural em Moçambique é a que é menos provida de serviços financeiros. Então, a questão é como é que nós vamos fazer com que a grande parte da população que se encontra nas zonas rurais tenham serviços financeiros. Um dos grandes desafios que nós temos tem a ver com a parte das infraestruturas. Mas nós temos que verificar que mesmo em locais onde hoje temos infraestruturas mínimas, continuamos a não ter serviços financeiros. Então, o que é que tem sido feito em Moçambique para atingir esta grande parte da população? Uma das soluções que tem sido implementada tem a ver com os serviços digitais, portanto, serviços digitais financeiros, concretamente a parte dos serviços móveis. Nós acreditamos que com o surgimento dos serviços das instituições de moeda eletrónica, que em Moçambique só surgiram a partir de 2011, temos aqui uma nova linha de serviços que podem chegar a mais pessoas que se encontram distante de um banco físico. A questão principal que está por volta deste tipo de serviços, quer móveis, quer os outros digitais que os bancos oferecem, coloca-se quais são os produtos e os serviços que são mais apropriados para essas pessoas. E ao colocar esta questão, eu gostaria de pôr os bancos e todas as outras instituições que fornecem serviços ao público a pensarem como é que nós devemos desenhar os produtos de modo a estarem centrados na pessoa que vai ser, no fim do dia, a beneficiária. Com isto, eu pretendo dizer que estamos num momento em que, ao desenharmos os produtos, temos que ter em conta não só aquilo que nós que estamos a desenhar achamos que a população precisa, mas temos que ver quais são aqueles produtos que mais rapidamente vão criar o nível de confidência para as pessoas utilizarem os serviços financeiros. Nós sabemos que as pessoas que estão nas zonas rurais, muitas das vezes, nunca estiveram com esse tipo de aproximação deste tipo de instituições, então os serviços a serem oferecidos devem ser desenhados de modo a eles a sentirem-se próximos a resolver os problemas reais que em cada local se enfrentam. Qual deve ser, então, o papel do regulador neste aspecto dos produtos? O Banco Central, neste caso concreto de Moçambique, aprovou, no ano passado, um regulamento com vista a analisar, antes das instituições financeiras lançarem um determinado produto financeiro para ser utilizado, devem se aproximar do Banco de Moçambique, onde se faz uma demonstração, onde se questionam, verificam-se todos os aspectos de risco que possam estar relacionados com este produto, como é que esse produto acautela as questões de proteção do consumidor. Com isto, nós entendemos que o Banco Central está-se a preocupar de que os produtos financeiros devem estar o mais próximo alinhado com o interesse dos beneficiários finais. Uma outra questão que está relacionada com a questão dos produtos e serviços a serem oferecidos à população tem a ver com a questão da interoperabilidade. Eu dizia que não estou a falar somente de parte dos serviços móveis, mas de todos os serviços digitais. E quando falamos de serviços digitais, também entra aqueles serviços que muitas das vezes são fornecidos pela banca. Aí há necessidade de haver, primeiro, uma interoperabilidade entre os bancos, uma interoperabilidade entre as instituições de moeda eletrónica e, por fim, o objetivo que nós temos é de ver estas duas entidades a terem também interoperabilidade entre elas. Porque nós pensamos que não basta só ter o acesso ao produto financeiro, no fim do dia o que queremos é que as pessoas comecem a ter hábito de poupar e nós acreditamos que a poupança só será feita via sistema bancário. Por isso, nós queremos esta relação de bancos e instituições de moedas eletrónicas. Para isso, no caso concreto de Moçambique, foi assinado um acordo entre o regulador do sistema financeiro e o regulador da telefonia móvel, para garantir que esta questão da operabilidade e a questão de segurança nos serviços móveis seja cautelada. Queria também fazer aqui uma referência a alguns regulamentos que foram recentemente aprovados pelo Banco Central, que tem a ver com a questão dos agentes bancários. É uma figura que está sendo criada no sentido de fazer com que os bancos estejam presentes sem fisicamente terem lá uma agência física num determinado local. Este novo serviço está na sua fase inicial. Acreditamos que nos próximos tempos poderemos apresentar o impacto do resultado dessa nova figura de agente, que, no nosso entender, pode ajudar a atingir aqueles que se encontram em zonas recônditas. Estas eram as primeiras observações que eu tinha sobre as diferentes atividades que estão sendo feitas a nível de Moçambique para fazer com que os serviços financeiros cheguem às zonas mais recônditas possíveis. Obrigada.
Thank you very much, Selena. And it will be interesting to see how that collaboration between the regulators goes, as that has been highlighted as an issue in other markets. But before we take questions, I'd like to hear from Dr. Shidlovsky about the experience in Peru.
Thank you very much. I want to start by reading you something that we all heard, but maybe we weren't able to listen to it quite as well because it was sung in Portuguese. Today, at the dawn of growth, the people want bank moving to the citizen's speed, bank growing near the hut where sows the future, bank that opens to the barefoot of peasant in order to receive the calloused hands the deposit, paying the signed fingerprint check, the value of crop that is harvested. Isn't this beautiful? This is what we're about. That's what this session is about. It's the last frontier. It's a big frontier. That's where we need to go. Now, how close have we come to it in Peru? Not so sure. Certainly not as beautiful as this poem. This poem is remarkable. I'm taking it with me. Maybe I can have it translated to Quechua, one of our native languages, because it's really lovely. But we have made some progress. As you're probably aware, Peru is a country of mountains. The Andes Mountains crisscross the country. And they're a major problem because they make roads difficult. They make access difficult. The tallest mountain is, about 6,000 meters. So we compete with the Himalayas. I was sitting next to the Honorable Governor of the Central Bank of Nepal yesterday at dinner. We compared a bit what it's like to trek in the Andes and in the Himalayas. We don't have quite as tall mountains as Mount Everest, but we're getting close. So at the level of banking and financial inclusion, we badly needed to do something. And what we needed was to flatten the mountains. Now, you'd think that's very difficult to do, but in fact, we're flattening the mountains. That's what cell phone banking is all about. With the internet and with cell phones, that's what you do. You suddenly leapfrog this difficult barrier, which is originally a geographic barrier, and you penetrate anywhere you want to get to, because electronics has a capacity of jumping above the mountains. So as far as the bank regulator is concerned, we have erased the mountains from our maps. We don't see mountains anymore in the Superintendencia. They're gone. But now, once they're gone, the question is what happens next? So we need to have a few things in order to make the mountains effectively gone. One thing that we need is a good internet network. Well, fortunately, Peru does have a good internet network. Actually, the data communication is a lot better than the voice communication. We have pretty much full coverage, not 100%, but very close to it. And there's sufficient bandwidth. We had Queen Maxima examine us on that issue when she was in Peru last year. That's what she wanted to know. Is the bandwidth good enough to actually provide access? Well, the bandwidth is not good enough to talk in a lot of places, but it's good enough for data. And that's what matters. So we were able to say, although we weren't sure, we asked around, does the telco know about this? It was okay. We passed the exam. So we need to have bandwidth. And the other thing we need to do is we need to have decent regulation. Now, I'm pleased to say that thanks to AFI, we were able to gather the best quality regulation in the world. We were able to get all the inputs from various places, from Kenya, the Philippines, South Africa, and everywhere else. And we put together our own version, which we believe is the best there is. Now, probably it won't be the best for very long because somebody else will have something a little better. But at least it'll serve us well. So we have good regulation. Now then you need something which is much more difficult. You need adoption. People have to use cellular money. And there's two things. People have to use it when they buy, and they have to use it when they sell. Now, getting people to use it when they buy turns out to be fairly easy because the government makes lots of payments. So as long as you can get the government to make its payments through the cell phones, you have, several million people who are going to get a paycheck, every month, who are going to be getting it in their cell phone accounts. And it's also not hard to generate accounts in the national banks. Everybody has a bank account. Now, this is a bit of a fiction because you pay it in one time, and as our colleagues in the private sector know, the next question is how do you get usage? So the problem really isn't to get people to buy with cell phone money, it's to get people to sell for cell phone money. That's the challenge. And so if we're going to be successful at conquering this last frontier and making what the poem says it tries to do and has as an ambition reality, we're going to need to get people in the backwoods selling product for and taking in exchange for the sale cell phone money. That's the challenge. So how can we make some progress? Well, fortunately, there is a tradition, of course, of trade credit in most countries, and we have it also. So there is a trade credit system which, sells to the small bodegas and to the small suppliers of staples product on credit, which then also gets passed on often to the households. But what's perhaps more effective is to use large chains of distributors to take payment in cell phone money. The brewery, the Coca-Cola distributor, the people who sell noodles, the people who sell flour, the people who sell soap, people who sell detergent, those large distribution chains, of which we have 4 or 5, that distribute a whole range of things. Once they take payment in cell phone money, there will be something for people to buy with their cell phone money. So the issue is not that people don't want to buy, it's that people don't want to sell, don't know how to sell. That's where the challenge is. So this is peculiarly really in the domain of the real economy, not in the domain of the financial regulator. So, we're talking the wrong fellow here. It's not something that I can easily do. However, the game is not completely lost because these large companies that distribute it, and take the brewery, for instance, most of the beer is sold for cash or for very short credit terms. So that means that the brewery is inundated with cash, and it needs to be transported all over the mountains. And the result is that, of course, trucks get attacked because they have cash in them, and so it's dangerous. So the brewery has a very strong incentive in becoming cashless and becoming better than cash, so to speak. So, and the same is true, of course, for noodles distributors and for flour distributors. They all want to go to a cashless economy. So they have a strong incentive in finding ways to make it possible for transactions to take place without cash, with cell phone money. It'll take some time. It's a different challenge. But fortunately, because there are few agents that have to be persuaded, and they're fairly centralized, it's possible to do that. Now that's underway in Peru. Unfortunately, I cannot report to you how successful it is or what stage it is because it's not in the purview of the financial regulator. It's not that we don't know. Well, probably couldn't talk about it anyhow, even if we to the extent that we do know, because this stuff is always confidential. But it's moving along. It's moving a little slower than the other side. The other side is very easy, and that's where we are. Now, I'm very hopeful that this is going to get resolved because the overwhelming incentive is there. It pays for companies who have large distribution networks to take their payment in cell phone money. Now, let's speculate just a moment, if you allow me, on what the next consequences are. Consider, a small town which has 1 cash-in, cash-out or 2 cash-in, cash-out points It's up in the mountains, pretty far away. There are a number of scattered smaller villages around that have schools or perhaps an official or two. And all these people, when they want to get paid, need to come in to the main village. And there's a market in the village, market day, when when money is collected, on payday there is a market. Not usually on Sunday because banks are closed, so it's got to be some other day, right? And so what then happens is that people have to buy when they have the cash and when they're in town, because that's the only time they can. So they come in, they take the truck ride, then a bus ride, or maybe they ride a bicycle, usually not. And they come into town and they have 4 or 5 hours to buy the supplies they want and then take them back to where they're from. That creates, from an economic point of view, very inelastic demands, very price inelastic demands. As a result, you have the formation of local monopolies. Prices are high because everybody knows that, by the time they're going to leave, they have to have their supplies. They have to have bought. And of course, there are fewer sellers than there are buyers, so there's an asymmetry in the market, and therefore, price is relatively higher. Now imagine for a moment what will happen when people do not have to come to the town anymore. They can actually do their purchase in their villages. The number of suppliers is going to increase. It's true that it's going to be a little more expensive to transport the products to the smaller villages, but the competitiveness is going to go up. So the result will be the cost of living will go down, and we'll get greater equity and income distribution. So what will happen is, as a byproduct of cell phones, we're going to get an improvement, a lowering cost of living, and a better distribution of income. Secondary consequence, not expected, but a good secondary consequence. So this is just one of the things that's likely to happen. There will be other things. It's very hard to predict what else will happen. I suspect that there will also be political consequences. It's very hard to imagine a situation where citizens get better control of their finances and they do not feel more empowered as citizens. I know that over my lifetime, the level of conscious empowerment in Peru has changed dramatically. From a population where we thought ourselves as fairly passive and there was somebody ruling us, we now are a population that believes in democracy. We run our own show. If we don't like the people in government, we throw them out. That is, we do so every 5 years. We have an election, and then we can change them. In between, there's maybe a problem, but we can renew them. And the sense of consciousness, of conscious control, is enormously greater. This is going to be accelerated by the integration of the backwoods into our economies. So a byproduct is going to be greater consciousness, greater citizen control, and it's going to be, I think, more effective and efficient economy as well. Because when people feel empowered, they act very differently. And this is going to be a byproduct that is behind the horizon. We don't really know it very well yet. But I'm very hopeful that we're going to see some very, very interesting changes in Peru. And of course, I talk about Peru, but I suspect in other countries there will be similar phenomena. I know that from Peru's point of view, we're going to learn to see what happens elsewhere. We're going to watch closely so that we can try to predict. And there are a number of countries here from which we can learn and where we may be able to see what's in store for us as we indeed also provide some examples. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists. So there have been some really thoughtful and interesting, thought-provoking comments made during this. And before I open it up for questions from the audience, I wanted to direct a question to a couple of our panelists on the subject of regulation and the interaction between telco regulators and financial regulators, because it is coming up as an issue in a number of places. So, Dr. Szydlowski, in the case of Peru, I'd be particularly interested to hear from you on the subject of how you engage with the telcos, because in Latin America, the telcos have not, can you hear me? The telcos have not necessarily been that proactive in mobile money. A lot of this digitization of cash does depend on the participation of the telcos. I know that Peru has actually mandated through the interoperability project in the mobile money regulations that telco providers will provide access to that data channel. And I know that experiment in interoperability through the platform developed by the Bankers Association has just started, so it may be too soon to But I'd be interested in your thoughts on what the likely dynamics are going to be around that and bringing the telcos into the system.
Well, you have a number of different models in Latin America as to, how actively you intervene as a regulator and to what extent how you share that intervention between the telco regulators and the financial regulators. In the case of Peru, we were fortunate when our legislation was passed. There was an article inserted which gave the telco regulator considerable range of authority as to how to encourage, let's put it that way, how to encourage, or if necessary, do a little more than encouraging the telcos from playing. The telcos were really not given a context where they could hold up anything or indeed, in some sense, charge monopoly prices. But it turned out that wasn't necessary. It's a case of, when there's an implicit threat, then nothing, you don't need to use it. So telcos, have been fairly reasonable about their agreement with the banks. On the other hand, our banking association has developed a single platform. Now, this was unexpected. It's a very good development, but there was nothing that would guarantee why 2 or 3 of the largest banks wouldn't try to run their own system and not coalesce. And yet, they saw that economies of scale dominated. So what happened is that they all got together, and they're, in some sense, betting on the fact that they will gain much more by going for scale than by fighting about distributive shares. Now, from the point of view of the regulator, I mean, that's what we hoped would happen, but there's no guarantee that it would. Fortunately, we didn't have to push anybody. This happened by itself. A couple of banks took the lead. The president of the Banking Association had an enormous hand, very well-regarded and respected person who I think played an important role in convincing different actors that they should go along. And then, of course, these are always things that are you cannot replicate. It turned out that we had a very charming and engaging and very bright minister of welfare, and she decided to resign from the government because she wanted to take care of her children. And then she was recruited to become the chairman, the CEO, of the banking systems platform. And of course, who can resist? She's so bright and she's so charming. Now, I don't want to make a sexist comment here because that's not appropriate. But it does help a little bit when somebody's charming, either male or female. It's so much easier to get along with them, right? This has helped. Every little bit helps. You got good leadership, and you have to have a little luck. Progress takes a little luck. Sometimes more than a little luck, but luck helps for sure.
So with that, I want to open it up to the audience. Are there questions from the audience? Please raise your hands. Yes, this lady.
Hello, I'm Fatma from Central Bank of Sudan. My question is concerning the provision of financial service in the rural area. As we know, the banks or the financial providers are seeking for profit maximization, and regulator may ask them to locate their unit in the rural area in order to provide the service to those population where the lack and weakness of infrastructure. I would like to know if there are any incentive that the regulators can offer to those providers in order to ensure their continuous presence and provision of the financial service there. Thank you very much.
Is there anyone that you would like to direct that to in particular?
To all of the presenters.
Okay, would anybody, go ahead. I think Celina's going to respond.
Yeah. Partilhando pouco a experiência de Moçambique sobre a parte dos incentivos para os bancos se aproximarem de onde está a maioria da população. O Banco de Moçambique, em 2007, aprovou um normativo cujo objetivo principal era dar alguns incentivos fiscais. Esse regulamento foi feito em conjunto com o governo. Portanto, os bancos que abrissem alguma agência numa zona rural tinham benefícios fiscais, significando que parte dos equipamentos que eles fossem adquirir para essas instituições tinham bonificações e também outros incentivos que o Banco Central relaxou para essas instituições que iam para essas zonas. Recentemente, o Banco Central, para fazer com que os bancos abram mais agências nessas zonas, que pelo menos a infraestrutura não é um problema, lá existe comunicações, estrada, luz. Para esses sítios, o banco tirou uma norma de proporcionalidade, significando que se abre uma agência numa zona urbana, tem que ir abrir também naquelas zonas rurais que já existem condições de infraestrutura. Portanto, isto tudo é a forma de fazer com que haja pelo menos uma presença física de uma agência. Mas é verdade que mesmo estando nesses distritos, como eu bem disse, o país é bem longo, há necessidade de haver outras formas de fazer com que os serviços financeiros cheguem às zonas rurais, sem ser necessariamente via a presença física de uma agência. Mas estes são dois exemplos que em Moçambique estão acontecendo. Muito obrigada.
Thank you. Dr. Shidlovsky, would you like to respond on that? Would you like to respond to the question as well as a regulator?
Well, you can always imagine incentives because the government, if it has enough of a pot of money, can always do something. But the problem usually is that the government's short of money, and there are other uses of the fund. So that's the fly in the ointment. Now, if you have a regulation that stands in the way, then you can do something that perhaps doesn't cost you any money. Let me give you an example. In Peru, the definition of a branch bank is shared, or well, let's put it this way. The safety of a branch bank depends on two things. It depends on the superintendencia, we regulate that, but then the Ministry of Interior has something to say about the physical safety of the branch. You know, how large a vault it needs, how thick the walls have to be, what about the windows? There's a whole bunch of regulations. Now, some of those, you know, were written 40 years ago, they were modified 20 years ago, and it's been a discussion to modify them for the last 15 years. And therefore, they're totally outdated. And it makes no sense to have some of these things on the books anymore, but there they are, and we can't get rid of them. So now, what you then have to do, and we've done, is we've defined some things that are not branch banks. There are now offices that are not branch banks. And so now we have corresponding cashiers. Now, they're not subject to the regulations of the Ministry of Interior. But now our own regulations have gotten our way. We've said, well, corresponding cashiers have to be independent from the institutions they work for. They're cash-in, cash-out points. They're owned by somebody else. Very good. Now, what if there is no bodega, no pharmacy, no store in a village, and there is a financial institution would like to have an agent in the village? What then? So just a month ago, we have approved a regulation that says if you can't find anybody else, you can have one, and then it specifies under what conditions. So you can make it possible to serve distant clients in ways that are effective. Now, this translates also to the question of how you transport cash. Cash transport has to take place in armored trucks. Armored trucks do not get through many of the roads of Peru. So what do? You cannot transport cash because the armored trucks they get stuck in the mud. So anybody who's watched a James Bond movie knows that there are ways to transport cash that don't depend on armored trucks. But it appears our Ministry of Interior people have never seen a James Bond movie. So we brought in the World Bank to tell us how to move cash with, in the James Bond style. Maybe the Ministry of Interior will listen to them. So there are ways. Yes, there are no ways. The answer to your question, I think, yes, we have to invent ways to get around our own difficulties because these difficulties are usually man-made. They're not there inherently. We have ways of thinking, and we need to find ways to think outside the box. And the beauty of AFI is that there's so many of us here that have interesting ideas, and what works in one place might work in another one. So we can copy it. So we don't have to be inventing everything. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We may need to reinvent James Bond. I don't know. That may be. But we can do a lot of things that we haven't thought of because somebody else already done it.
Would either of our private sector panelists like to respond?
How's this one? Great. Speaking from a private sector or social enterprise perspective, it can be difficult to, to move into a business that may not be profitable, may not have long-term sustainability prospects. It may not be possible for a regulator to insist on that move in all cases. One thing I touched on when I was speaking was maybe indirect incentivizing of financial service providers to enter those markets. And I think a lot of that relies on this element of taking the risk out of lending to smallholder farmers. If we can create a climate or an environment where it's much less risky to access these markets, and cell phone banking is one of them, access to inputs is another, you're going to see more movement and more willingness of financial service providers to, on their own, enter and serve those markets.
I'm Summer, a banking sector regulator. My question is from Mark Atmisi, from you. The model that you explained is the one which has which provides a club of services, you see, like giving inputs, things. One of the regulators' concern is, like in this model, how could we ensure that the service provider does not exploit the small farmers, you see, in terms of providing expensive seed, in terms of asking to use more and more fertilizer, because there's a whole loop there. So how could that concern of the regulators could be addressed?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of that is resolved by market forces and the perspective of the smallholder farmer. One of the key drivers for enrolling farmers into our program is the impact that they see from actually being part of this program. So we're realizing between 50 and 100% increases in farm productivity once with clients that are participating in our program. These smallholder farmers still have options besides One Acre Fund in their community. I mean, the options are not always readily available, or they're not always the best, but if we were to insist that they buy so much more in inputs than they know they need for their farm, and all it would take would be one season to say, this is too expensive, I'm not seeing the results, I'm not going to participate in this program. So I really think the proof is in the result at the end of at harvest, and that's why we continue to grow and enroll, and that's why farmers are benefiting from the program.
I think we have time for a couple of other questions. This gentleman? Your microphone is there.
Thank you. The question is still to the last speaker. You talk about providing input for the farmers. Do you? I mean, you talk about providing input for the farmers. Do you help them to connect them to markets? And if you do connect them to markets, where there's variation in price, because you talk about supply and demand also, where there's a variation in terms of pricing of products from one season to the other, how do you guarantee a very comfortable price for the farmers?
That's also a great question, thank you. In our approach, it's different than every other approach, and some other financial service providers see security in entering a value chain where they can guarantee some sort of purchase price or guarantee purchase of the harvest for their farmers. Our approach is different because we work with consumption crops. So in Kenya, for example, we work with maize pretty exclusively. And what's happening there is that's a high demand crop, and these are very smallholder farmers. We're talking 1 acre, which is where the name comes from, maybe less. And we have experimented with connecting farmers to markets as programs, and we really found that farmers didn't have a demand for it because they were able to sell their maize on the local market for more than we'd be able to provide aggregating their crop. There's a demand for the extra maize they're producing. So in terms of our program, that hasn't been an issue, and that's not really an issue that our clients face. But it's different depending on how you've designed your program and the crops that they're working with.
Floor for our panelists. This gentleman, yes.
tarde. O meu nome é Bubacash Tomia, sou diretor-geral da carteira móvel MCash. A questão que eu vou apresentar é para a administradora do Banco de Moçambique. Nós somos uma empresa que transaciona em moeda eletrónica e a pergunta é a seguinte: dado que a inclusão financeira é um objetivo do Governo e foi aqui realçado durante as sessões, e uma vez que a administradora falou dos incentivos aos bancos comerciais e a carteira móvel, o MCash, não é um banco tradicionalmente comercial, ou seja, enquanto os bancos comerciais têm a componente de moeda eletrónica como um negócio marginal e a carteira móvel tem, portanto, a moeda eletrónica como core business, eu gostaria de saber se, para o caso das empresas que transacionam em moeda eletrónica, existe algum incentivo na manga para este tipo de empresas. Eu vou explicar porquê. É que as nossas empresas, eu posso dar o exemplo da carteira móvel do MCash como do M-Pesa, não alugam dinheiro, ou seja, não arrendam dinheiro, não obtêm juros de empréstimos. Daí que o seu revenue é muito baixo. Elas sobrevivem, primeiro, à custa dos acionistas, segundo, da pouca receita que advém das transações que são feitas através da moeda eletrónica. A primeira pergunta já foi feita. A segunda pergunta, que é mais de reflexão, é a semelhança do que acontece na área das telecomunicações. O Instituto Nacional de Comunicações tem um fundo que se chama Fundo Universal. Se em algum momento o regulador Banco de Moçambique já terá pensado na criação de um fundo dessa natureza para atingir, portanto, objetivos desta natureza, portanto, que é atingir as zonas mais desfavorecidas do país. Porque, sem ser assim, eu não posso falar pelo M-Pesa, mas falo pelo MCash, não vai ser possível, pelo menos a curto prazo, atingir essas zonas em que, apesar de existir rede, portanto, rede móvel, não é fácil nós termos agentes que tenham incentivo suficiente para desenvolver esta atividade que possa ajudar o Governo a atingir o seu objetivo. Muito obrigado.
Obrigada. Bom, respondendo às duas questões, quanto à primeira resposta, como eu disse, esses incentivos foram em 2007, e em 2007 não existia nenhuma instituição de moeda eletrónica, portanto não estão abrangidos, pelo menos... Ok, desculpa. Estava a dizer, como eu disse inicialmente, esses incentivos foram... Estava a dizer que... Estava a responder às duas questões colocadas. Estava a responder às duas questões colocadas. Agora estão a ouvir? Tá? She said no. She said no. No. Something's because she's okay. No, eu estava a dizer que, respondendo às questões colocadas pelo o responsável da Mcash, uma das nossas instituições de moeda eletrónica. Quanto à primeira questão, como bem sabe, esta normativa é de 2007 e nessa altura não existia neste país nenhuma instituição de moeda eletrónica, portanto, não podiam ter estado incluídos nesse normativo. A segunda questão que coloca, para mim é mais uma questão de fundo, e iria convidar a Mcash para efetivamente participar no debate que está a acontecer neste momento da Estratégia Nacional de Inclusão Financeira. Portanto, não são questões que possam ser respondidas num debate desta natureza. Teria que se ver quais são os objetivos deste fundo, o que é que se pretende mesmo com este fundo. Portanto, são mais questões de fundo que eu acho que, neste momento, podem ser devidamente discutidas no âmbito da elaboração da Estratégia Nacional de Inclusão Financeira. Iniciou um debate a nível das instituições sobre a possibilidade de criação de um fundo de educação financeira, mas também está em processo de discussão. Portanto, se acha que deve haver também um fundo que ajuda a levar os serviços financeiros às zonas rurais, eu iria convidar a levar este tipo de discussões a este nível da discussão da Estratégia Nacional de Inclusão Financeira. Muito obrigada.
We're out of time, so I'd like to thank all of my panelists, Dr. Shidlovsky, Dr. Makombe, Mark Adams, and Mark Flaming, for a very entertaining and insightful discussion, and thanks to all of you. Okay.